Hello everyone, welcome back to Age Nagash, which is a channel dedicated to Age Sigmar, and in this video we are going to be talking about why play Stormcast Eternals in Age of Sigmar. So essentially the point of this video is if you're considering playing Stormcast Eternals and just want to know a little bit more about them, maybe their strengths and weaknesses, that's what we'll go over in this video, and hopefully by the end you'll make a decision if Stormcast Eternals is the army for you to play. Alternatively, if you've already got the army, you just want a little bit more motivation to actually start cracking on with them, getting them painted and getting them ready for battle, hopefully this video will help. However, it is impossible for me to do this video as Nagash without expressing my deep hatred for Stormcast and Sigmar himself. So, I had done quite a large rant at the start and then I've had to edit it down, and now I've put myself in a position where I only have 20 seconds to rant about Stormcast before I talk about them in a very positive light. So, firstly, Sigmar is a thief, a barbarian and a traitor. He steals souls with a rightfully Nagash's and uses what he has stolen against Nagash, invading Shaiish. I am Nagash, and I shall tear him down from his throne of lies. None shall defy the will of Nagash. Right, now calm down and let's get into the video before I go on another rant. Okay, so why play Stormcast Eternals? Well, firstly and quickly, we're going to remind ourselves who are the Stormcast Eternals. Stolen property. I mean, going back to the Age of Chaos when Sigmar knew he had lost the mortal realms, he shut the gates to his own realm known as Azir. He then knew he had to make a weapon powerful enough to take back the realms from Chaos. However, the weapon he came up with wasn't as simple as a bomb or a spell or some sort of weapon you would wield, but instead a new type of super soldier, to be named Stormcast Eternals, Sigmarines, who were once mortal warriors who stood against impossible odds to defend their homelands, their family and friends. And in their final moment, their last stand, Sigmar took them from where they stood and brought them to the Anvil of Apotheosis, where their souls were reforged into the demigod warriors you see today. Upon making the Stormcast Eternals, Sigmar organised them into different storm hosts, which is the name given to the different regiments of Stormcast. Sigmar then unleashed them into the realms to push Chaos back, and the Age of Sigmar had finally begun. So now that we've talked about some of the history and stuff, what really makes the Stormcast special, if you like, because they are the poster boys, of course, is their incredible form of Immortality, which is when a Stormcast dies, its soul is shot back to the Anvil Apotheosis in Azir, like we've mentioned, to be reforged anew. This means the soul of a brave soldier who once stood his ground never really dies. However, the more a single soul is reforged, the more it becomes less of themselves, forgetting memories and becoming more of a sharpened weapon than having any humanity at all. Now, the last thing I want to point out about the Stormcast is that you may be thinking they're all good and they're basically quite boring because there's nothing, like grey about them. However, do not forget about the Knight Excelsius, for example, which is one of the storm hosts like we've mentioned before. However, these guys are quite zealous in purging chaos, shall we say. They essentially will condemn the souls of hundreds of innocents of a town in order to purge the town of its one corrupted soul. Just to make sure that there isn't any chance of the corruption spreading, they will kill as many as possible. There was actually a malign portent short story that came out, was it 2018 I think? Anyway, short story describing how there are refugees on a riverboat heading towards the safety of a citadel up the river. And when these refugees got towards the citadel, they saw it was in flames. And they were worried for their lives until they saw the outline of Stormcast Eternals. And they thought, we're saved! However, the Stormcast Eternals had then fired upon the refugees in fear that they could be corrupted with chaos. So, there are some nicer storm hosts of the Stormcast Eternals. However, there are also some who are quite zealous. And remember how we been talking about, you know, when they get reforged, they lose memories, they just become more of a weapon as they lose their humanity and just become a bit more bloodthirsty. And this is, you know, known as like the Stormcast problem. The only thing I will say there is that it seems very much like, oh no, this wasn't intended, you know, they weren't made just for weapons, you know, they're meant to remain intact with their, you know, like memories. It's what makes them who they are. However, if you're a godlike being like Sigmar and you have your warriors, but the more you use them, the more they die, the more they get reforged, they lose their identities and become more of a weapon just for him to wield. I mean, he says that, oh, you know, didn't mean for this to happen. However, it's a bit convenient, I think, at the same time. Bear in mind that these Stormcasts are going to have to go into the worst possible situations ever. I mean, like, when I say, like, they're Sigmarines, it's because, you know, they go into the brunt of pure evil in Age of Sigmar and the Mortal Realms. As, remember, when they die, they do feel pain. It's not a case of, oh, they're immortal, you know, they don't feel pain, they don't die, they just come back again. They do feel very much pain, and there are some horrendous stories of how they die horribly. Which is funny, because the big thing Sigmar has over Nagash, or what he says, you know, like on his moral high horse, is that Nagash forces the souls of the dead to fight against their will and never be able to rest. Kind of what Sigmar's doing with Stormcast. But anyway, enough with that. So, now that we've talked about what Stormcasts are, let's look at more about why you should play them. So, firstly, what I like to do in these videos, if you've seen my other videos of why plays, you'll know, but in case you're new, what I do is I firstly look at more on a hobby side, you know, why to play them, and collect them, of course. So, the first thing I'd like to say is, like I say, especially if you're new, they have a huge model range, and I want to say the largest in all of Age of Sigmar. And before people say things like, well, when you talk about why play Nurgle, they can ally with loads of things. Yes, that's true, and you know, they can incorporate the different armies in their allegiance. However, Stormcast as a thing has a huge amount of models. You know, there's loads of variety, loads of Lords of Distance for you to buy, but very few other models for other armies. But they have loads of different types. They have no particularly like small infantry models as you would like to think. Like if you know Age of Sigmar, you know, like one wound sort of like standard more human size. However, they have elite infantry, being, you know, standard liberators or secretors, and then they can go all the way up to things like Dracolines, Dracoffs. You also got, you know, things like Desolators and Retributors, which are like heavier armoured, Stormcasts. And then you have things like Star Drakes, Celestin Prime, loads of heroes, like I mentioned, to choose from. So there's loads of variety there for you. And as they are very new models as well, because they came out in Age of Sigmar, you know, funny enough, that means that generally things like mold lines, put them together, stuff like that is very good compared to some of the older armies out there. You know, like it's all plastic, there's no resin, there's no metal. Currently at this time recording. And the other nice thing about that, because like I say, they are a new army, and they are, of course, you know, the poster boys, they call them, you know, like the golden boys, is that there's loads of ways to get into that army. There's like loads of discounts. There's, you know, like those big boxes you can get, like Soul Wars, or there's start collecting boxes, or you can try and get a few of the magazines from the Mortal Realms subscription, depending obviously on what country you're in. But I think it's, I know it's in Australia now, so there's not a few around. There's lots of ways that you can get into them without spending too much money. Obviously this is Warhammer, so it costs money, but compared to other armies it can be a bit more easier to do that. So the other thing about them is that they can be much more interesting than they appear on the box, and this is more of a personal preference, as for me the gold and blue is very boring and doesn't really excite my imagination for that colour scheme. But you guys might like it, and that's absolutely fine. You know, we all like different things. However, when I saw firstly like Stormcast and lots of different colour schemes, it really thought like I think one of the first ones I saw was like a Roman colour scheme, which I've painted a test and model off, and it really does, you know, like show them in a different light. How I personally paint mine when I do, you know, like the odd Dead One and for dioramas and stuff, is I go for a black and purple colour scheme, which I personally really like. It makes the Stormcasts, in my honest opinion, look a bit more sinister, so that's what I like. However, you can really come up with your own colour schemes however you would like to. Most colour combinations work. with them. They're quite simple as well. You know, they've got like the colour on the shoulder pads and the shields. You know, it's a little bit similar to Space Marines in how loads of colours work for these guys. Or of course you can pick one of the Storm hosts and you can go from there. It's absolutely up to you. It's like, although it's not Stormcast specifically, but for my State of Darkness army, I've converted a lot of Stormcast models into Chaos models, and the colour scheme I've gone for that is white and purple as well. So if I only stick with the purple, it's because my favourite colour is red, and I'm trying to break away from that, so I don't use it all the time. But the white and purple works really well, I find, as well. So there's loads of different things you can come up with. And what I would say is that if you're still trying to figure out what colour scheme you want to go for, because I can spend hours trying to think, and it can be on my mind for ages, because I need to know like the colour scheme. I also need to know what base I want to do, so I know how to set them in my lore, and I can sometimes think about it more than it's worth, to be honest, and it can take a lot of time. But what I would say to help you figure that out, if you're still trying to think, is if you got the Stormcast Battletone, or just look online, read up about the different Storm hosts, see what you kind of like. Look obviously at the colour schemes for those Storm hosts, and you could have, you know, like your ideal one already there. There's already lore for it, and fantastic, you're good to go. So also, as an elite army, there is not too many models to paint with that sort of thing, and like I said, it can be very easy to paint too. So you're not painting, you know, like hundreds of grots or loads of witch elves, and generally you don't have to paint the eyes on these models as well, so that's very cool because they're generally wearing helmets. So like I say, it can be very easy, or you can go as much as in depth as you like, depending on how much detail you want to put on them. I've seen Stormcast with loads of beautiful like freehand done on them. I've seen them when they've been converted up with Bretonian helmets and stuff, so and then they've got all the heraldry on the shields. For me personally, on the shields that I do like a checkers pattern or something like that, or stripes, just to break up the sort of like flat solid colour, which obviously you don't have to do, but it's completely up to you. You know, you can always, if you're new, start off with the Stormcast, you know, just standard, you know, sort of like basic tabletop colour scheme, you know, like 3 colours, that sort of thing, or 4 colours, and then as time goes on, you become a bit of a, you know, more experienced painter. You can chuck a bit of freehand on there as much as you like. Obviously the same goes with the bases. You make it very standard, you can add things on later. So I also believe that Stormcast can ally with any order army. So like I said, they have a huge model range, but if you want to have even more choice, you have the option of chucking in pretty much anything from order in there, which can make some really cool combinations. And I know for me personally, especially if I'm like new to the game or looking to do another army, I'm like, oh, I like, you know, like, I don't know, 90% of things in this army, and I want to do this army, but there's that like one model from the other range that I want to put in here from the other army, but it generally doesn't work out. In Stormcast, you know, it may not always be the most competitive thing, but, you know, you can do that. And now having a more focus on the actual tabletop itself, so when you're playing the army, the strengths we're going to look at, and to be honest, the main one is that there's just loads of different ways you can play the army. It can do everything. So it can do things like heavy on magic, it can do shooting, it can do melee, it can do movement shenanigans, it can be heavy elite infantry, to even very elite small model count. And there are loads and loads and loads of battalions to choose from to how to best shape your army, if that's something you would like to do. Because we've got things like Liberators for defensive and Secretors as well. We've got things like Judicators, Long Strike Crossbows, Ballistas for shooting, and there's more, of course, more than that. If you want to go heavy melee, you've got things like Retributors that hit hard, or you've got things like Dracolines or Dracovs that will do a lot of charge and damage, or you want to do sort of like movement shenanigans, you can get Griff Chargers, so you can use things like Compass that allows them to move something like 5d6. Very random, but can be very fast. You've got teleporting as well from deep striking. You've also got, like, you know, heavy monsters by taking things like Star Drakes. You've got magic users, of course, what came out when Soul Wars came out with the new chamber that was released. So there's lots of stuff you can do with your army. There's no one way to play it. Of course, like most armies, there will be like certain builds and lists that are better than the others. However, Stormcast has so much to choose from. Really, like, the army's your oyster, really, and how we want to build it. On a overall, the army, it has some of the best saves in the game, arguably the best sort of like flat saves in the game. Loads of 4-ups, quite a few free ups as well there, ways to get rerolls pretty easily. The army can also dish out some mortal wounds as well, in case you go against an army that is a bit of a mirror and has very good saves. Of course it can't just like blurt out as many as, like a Terrorgeist in one go sort of thing, but it can scatter a few here and there. And I know I've already mentioned it, but teleporting and deep striking is a huge strength in this game as it's part of movement. And what it really allows you to do is get behind the enemy. It means the enemy can never sort of like put their feet up and sort of like rest easy. You can't get to the backfield to get their back objectives. They always have to be on their toes. They may have to overcommit to make sure you can't steal objectives with them with a handful of units. So if they're overcommitting, then they haven't got their forces in the game where they're needed. They're sort of set back just in case you decide to go and take their objective. I've played against Stormcast, and when I played against them at a tournament once, I got to battle round 3 and I had Nagash and a Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon left, and it was the object, I think it's Scorched Earth when you burn the objectives, and I had to send Nagash off to burn 3 enemy objectives in 3 turns, and I had to keep a Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon as a glorified paperweight to hold down objective because the enemy had 5 Vanguard Hunters off the board. So if my Zombie Dragon moved up where it needed to be to take those objectives from the enemy, those 5 Vanguard Hunters would just pop on the board and burn it. So I had to massively overcommit there, and I think the Vanguard Hunters were something like 100 points, 120 points maybe. So you can really see how much of a pain it can be for your enemy to make sure that you can't get behind them. That's why teleport and deep strike is good. Also, because your army's not the fastest, it's a good way to move you guys around. And you generally have good heroes in the army. You have heroes that I would like to say, not in all cases, and I sort of, like I look at Stormcast and a bit of a biased view, as you can probably tell throughout this video, mainly at the start. But some heroes I feel like they're cheaper compared to if they were in a different army. Like for good basic, stats like good saves, good bravery, not bad weapon damage output. So you've got a few options there where you can put things in. Obviously, like one of the big things with Stormcast though is that you've got so much choice. You have to, you can't take it all with you in a game. You have to pick and choose how you want to take your list, which is, the same for all armies, but with Stormcast, because there's even more choice, it may just take a little bit more head scratching of how you want to do it. Okay, and now, of course, like we say, we're honest in these videos, so now moving on to things like weaknesses for the army. In all honesty, they are very vanilla. So when I say that, I mean they are a very sort of, standard army of Age of Sigmar, probably the most vanilla, as they are good at everything, but are masters of none. So that very standard thing where they can do a bit of this, a bit of that, but they're never the best at one of those categories. Now, I'm not a Stormcast player, of course, because I despise them. However, Stormcast may be a little bit more different to that, but that's just the outlook I've had on them. Although their shooting can be pretty damn powerful. So I think calling them vanilla is probably not completely true. And I think it's up to people to find those things where they are strengths at. Like their standard wizards are pretty good as well compared to other ones. There's things like auto unbinds and stuff they have, which other armies would kill for. So it's very solid, in my honest opinion, but I may be wrong. But I just want to point out, as they're like, for example, their teleporting is great, but their standard movement isn't so good. So when I say they've got loads of good movement shenanigans, a lot of it's quite random. A lot of it have to, be certain away from the enemy. So just bear this in mind. And something else I want to bring up is what I've seen is some people on the internet say you need to be a good experienced player to win with them. However, I think they are a good army to learn the game with, as their standard stats are good and are easy to learn, because people say that, there's only certain builds that you can do well with Stormcast. I think Stormcast flat out can do all right, standardly. And like I say, because their standard stats are easy to learn and they're solid, and it's quite a forgiving army because you have those good saves, you have multi-wound models. So if you make a mistake, it doesn't necessarily mean your model's going to die. The other thing with that as well is that if you do lose your games, because it's not a broken army, or fingers crossed, touch wood at this moment in time, I don't believe it's a broken army, and you lose your games, especially if you're new to Age of Sigmar, fantastic. The only way you learn the game is by losing. If you won every single game you ever played from start of the hobby to the end of the hobby, I mean, you know, you must be doing some sort of witchcraft, and that sounds amazing. However, you're not really learning. It sounds very much you're just riding on, you know, lady luck, rather than you've actually learned how to play the army well. Because I know for myself, I learn through my own mistakes. So if I don't make mistakes, I tend to not learn that much. So that's my thoughts with it there. And then only other weaknesses I want to say are my biased views. However, I said I'd keep them to an absolute minimum, so I will not do that in this video. So, coming to the end of it, before I start saying negative things again. In summary, why would you play this army? You would play Stormcast Eternals if you want to have an army that will always be relevant in both lore and the game of Age of Sigmar, as they have the biggest and newest model collection. So this means that they will always get an updated battle tome, you know, 1 to every 3 years, shall we say. It's usually like once a year, but it's been a while since Soul Wars, and it's been over 2 now. So, you know, 1 to every 3 years, which is more than most. That does mean, though, that I hope you enjoy buying and collecting lots of books, because I think they've had about 4 battle tomes at the start of Age of Sigmar, so, you know, you will have, obviously, books that come. So that is, a negative there. But if you want to always be on top of the rules of them, there's loads there. They'll always be relevant in the lore. There was a point in Age of Sigmar where any lore couldn't involve anyone but from Stormcast. There was a battle between Slaanesh invading the lands of Neferata, and Neferata was going to make a stand against this elite Slaanesh army. And then suddenly Stormcast come down and save the day and take all the attention away from Death, which back then Death didn't have much lore. So they always seem to find their grubby little paws in every single bit of lore. They're always going to be there, and they'll always tend to get a release alongside a new edition of the game. Like when Age of Sigmar, like 3rd edition drops, you can guarantee they'll get a new chamber or something will come out. Very much like Space Marines there, where, you know, for example, perfect example, you know, 9th edition for 40k, where, you know, like Necron's got some attention, and then, you know, like Space Marines had to have their equal attention cake, you know. So Stormcast are like that. They are the poster boys. You know, they went from nothing from the start of Age of Sigmar, so what, like 5 years, to having the biggest model range in the game, and it will only continue to grow. Also, with that, it's that you're going to, like I say, have the newest models, so that means you're going to have, you know, plastic hits. You're not going to be dealing with resin. You're not going to be dealing with metal, unless, you know, like there's some Forge World bits and stuff. The army is cheap to get into. The army is generally easy to build. There's quite a few like easy to build kits as well, which I know limits customization, but there's generally multi-part kits you can buy alongside that. It's an army that's pretty easy to customize as well. You can do simple changes and it makes a big difference. There is loads of inspiration to go from. There's some beautifully fantastic painted armies on the internet you can check out. And with that, like I say, it's an army you can paint up quickly, which I think most people, myself included, one of the biggest things I find is I buy models. They're in a box, sometimes I build them, but one of the last things I obviously do is paint them, which means they never really get used, and the backlog of dread and embarrassment surely continues in the pile of shame. So having an army that's quickly to paint means it's going to get done, finished, and quicker on the table, which means I'm going to enjoy it more. I'm going to get, you know, more value for money in that sort of sense. And it's an army that gives you loads of options on how to play them. So really, for a beginner or someone who's been painting a army that, you know, takes a lot of time and a lot of this effort and everything, it's an army that may be a welcome break from you. Or if you want an army that, like I say, will always be relevant and will never become obsolete, and you'll always be able to add new things to the army rather than starting other armies, this would be the perfect army for you. And I really cannot continue saying all these positive things about Stormcast because I'm Nagash and I absolutely fucking hate Sigmar. So I'm going to end the video here. I'm going to hope that you really enjoyed this video. If you did, please smash that like and subscribe button, as that massively helps the channel and it's absolutely free for you guys to do so. If you've got any comments or any questions you want to ask me, like I say, put them in the comments down below. If you are a Stormcast player and you think there are points that I have said wrongly, please let me know down in the comments as well, because we're all here to learn at the end of the day. I personally don't play the army. I just personally have a really strong hatred towards the army. So I feel like I've done quite a good job in this video to keep that to a minimum. Alternatively, if there's anything you thought that I've brought up and you agree with, let me know in the comment down below, as that's always nice to hear. And I'd like to say a massive shout out to my patrons who, if it wasn't for them, I simply wouldn't be able to keep the channel going. So a massive shout out to them. If you would like to become a patron, you can check out the link at the top of the description down below. Even if you just take a look, guys, I'll be much appreciative. But feel free not to, it's up to you. Anyway, so I thank you again very much for watching this. Remember, until next time, keep your hands clean, stay hygienic, and of course, remember, Nagash is all, and all is one in Nagash.